Your mama ain't your mama, but your mama don't know. Woe is me. Shame and scandal in the family. Woe is me. Shame and scandal in the family. Hi friends, welcome back to my channel. We're here today with another review. Today's discussion is about the novel Land of Love and Drowning by Tiphanie Yanique. It's one of the books that we selected for the Runwright Reads book club to read in October. If you're not familiar, the book club this year is reading novels that are set in the Caribbean. And every month we choose a different Caribbean country or territory and we read two novels by two different authors. So one of the books in October was Land of Love and Drowning. And it was really interesting to see Tiphanie Yanique's portrayal of her country. The United States Virgin Islands, like the name suggests, is not an independent country. It is a U.S. territory. It was formerly called the Danish West Indies, and the territory ownership was transferred in the early 1900s. I think 1917 is when ownership passed over to the United States. And Tiphanie Yanique shows this because her novel is set in the early 1900s during that time. And so we have characters who are alive during that transfer day and characters who are not present but hear about the expectation and the reality of that time. So it's a really unique novel because it is set in this time. It's not something that I've personally read before, and I really enjoyed it. So a little backstory about the United States Virgin Islands before we get in any further into discussing the novel is that there are many islands that make up the United States Virgin Islands. And while we outsiders may consider this part of the world to be homogeneous, the people who live there know the differences. They know the nuanced differences that exist between experiences on one island versus the other. There are, I think, 3 or 4 large islands, St. Croix, St. John. I don't remember the other one. But there are also, I think, 50 small islands. And it's interesting when you think about small islands because they're all small islands, but some are, of course, a lot smaller than the others. And while the novel is set on one of these major islands, there's also references to things that are happening in other places, other spaces. And there's a comparison of what can be had on the larger island versus what could be obtained on the smaller island and the travel back and forth. So Tiphanie Yanique covers a lot of this in her novel, in the narrative, and it's really well done. So that's one thing to note when you're reading the book. The other thing is that the novel does focus on religion, and especially Christian biblical perspective, and how religious beliefs and religious interpretations inform some of the decisions that we make. So there are lots of biblical references in this novel. There are names, like we have characters named Rebecca, spelled like Rebecca in the Bible. We have Rebecca naming her son Jacob Esau. So of course, if you're familiar with biblical history, then you know Esau and Jacob in the Bible were 2 brothers, and they split their parents' favor because the mother loved one child and the father loved the other child. And when it came time to get a blessing from the parents, the mother tricked the father to giving the blessing to her favorite son. And that is carried out a little bit in this novel, a little bit of that history, and how naming one person Jacob Esau is kind of forcing both parents to give the blessing to that one child. I love how the author kind of overlays that onto her story. There are also other characters with very significant names, like a person being called Yumi. And if you shorten that, do you call her you or do you call her me? And what does that mean when you speak to this character? There are also characters who have very proper names because the author goes into a little bit of the classism and the colorism that goes along with living in colonial property. How sometimes the favor is for people who are closer in appearance to the ruling class than others, and why do people seek out certain people for the power that goes along with that. Tiphanie Yanique's novel includes a really in-depth exploration of the lives of women and the flights of fancy that are nurtured in young girls as they dream of what womanhood is like versus the reality that sets in as a young woman matures into womanhood. And of course, the comparison between the life of a single woman and a married woman, a single woman who is at the brink of womanhood as she's courted by suitors and she's lauded for her beauty, and how as she ages, if she has not gotten married, what her experience is like as she ages and people start to think of her as being either gay or being a witch or something in between, some cruel morph of the two. And of course, the reality of marriage and some of the trappings that go along with marriage. So there's also a lot of discussion about class and how women's class could be tied to that of her husband and what happens when there's a fall in status. There's of course a different exploration of life in the various classes. So what life is like for a woman who is of wealthier means versus a woman whose life has been consigned to domestic roles, and some of the realities that go along with that. So this book is really rich in terms of its portrayal of lots of different experiences, and we compare what happens with young girls versus what happens with young boys as they go through some of the same things. There's also some superstition, and because this is a Caribbean book, you have to expect that there's discussion of obeah and witchcraft and how supernatural things invade even our regular experiences. Carrying this narrative, however, because it's not just a bunch of references, the novel is also a really interesting look at a family, the generations of a family, and how generational curses begin and how they're manifested. What happens when people are so focused on the secret part of generational curses that they are unwilling to acknowledge, even to themselves, how much power a secret has if you don't speak on it. So people who know detrimental things that could happen, things that they could avoid if they would just open their mouths and speak, and they avoid doing that because to expose the secret is just a shame that they're not willing to bring on, even though the shame that is associated with not acknowledging the secret is even that much more powerful. But again, this is a really strong novel about families, and at the heart of the novel we are following two families that are kind of inbred. They have associations with both, there are associations between both sides of the family. So it's two families, but they really operate like one, and various members of the family are crossing over the sides in inappropriate and illegal and unethical and improper ways in lots of places. And so there are parts of the novel where it is a little difficult to read and process because you know that these relationships are wrong, however you categorize them. But again, like I said, there are also these biblical references, and when you think about how some of these improper relationships are also they're also depicted in biblical stories, you start to wonder, can you move past the wrongness of a situation to focus more on the right things that are associated with it, even if those right things come later? Can you appreciate the gift if you set aside some of the curses that have been passed through before? I know I'm not making sense, but I don't want to give too much of the story away. There's a lot of depiction of improper relationships is what I'm saying. And Tiphanie Yanique explores music, especially Caribbean music, calypso, and how calypso and music in general, how music affects people. And so while she was exploring this improper relationship that is happening between two people, but is really rippling through and affecting all the members of their family, it brought to mind a song that I remember from my childhood. It's a calypso song, and it's called Shame and Scandal in the Family, and it's about a young man who is interested in a young woman in their community, but he goes to his parents and he wants to let them know this is the young woman that he'd like to keep company with. And the father pulls him aside and say, you can't be with that girl because that girl is your sister. I was with her mom, so you can't be with that girl. So that girl is your sister, but your mother don't know. And then, he can't let go of the thought that he still really likes this young lady. He wasn't raised to see her as his sister, so he doesn't, even if genetically she is. And so later he goes to his mother and he's explaining to his mother, I can't get this girl out of my mind. And the mother says, don't worry, you could date that girl because this man is not your father. So if that man is her father, then she's not your sister because he's not your father. And that's the shame and scandal in the family. And it's a funny song, but when you think about it in how it would be lived in a family and how that kind of a situation and turmoil would just affect the members of the family, if you let that to be the situation in this book, then it makes at least one of the situations a little easier to read. But it's not a resolution in this book, or at least, I can't tell you whether it's a resolution in this book or not. But it would be interesting to read the book with that mindset, that things sometimes aren't as you expect. So there's that. There's one other thing I wanted to point out about this book, and it's about the religious references. There's also a lot of discussion about color, and especially the colors that we clothe ourselves in. So there's a female character who's obsessed with the depiction of the Virgin Mary and how she's always represented as being clothed in blue. And so as she is living her life and she wants to misappropriate some of that association, she also clothes herself in blue. And then there are other characters who wear white and red at different points. And these are all colors that have very significant meanings, especially in biblical depictions. So what does blue mean on its own? What does wearing white, especially for a woman, what does wearing white mean? And what does wearing red mean? So, the comparison between virginity and the status of prostitution, or the state of prostitution. And what does it mean when you combine red, white, and blue? Do one of those overpower the others, or is there something specific that happens when you is the sum greater than the total? Is the total, what's the phrase? Is the sum greater than the total of its parts? Is that the phrase? So there's that. But then, of course, there is the red, white, and blue color of the United States flag. And how do you compare that former thing with the United States references? So there's a lot of symbology, symbolism, and allegory being painted in this book. There's a lot of discussion about what it means to be American territory versus American. And we have characters who are leaving their homeland and going to fight in the United States military, and what their experience is like, depicting patriotism for a country that doesn't really recognize them as patriots. And there's a lot in this book. There's a lot to enjoy. But of course, because if you're not able to overlook the inappropriate relationships, you may get bogged down on that and not be able to appreciate the other parts of this story. So I'm not saying that this is a book for everyone, because not everyone can overlook certain things or read past certain things. So this is not a book for everyone. But if you endure it, I think you'll find some things to really enjoy in this book. I personally really enjoyed it when I read past some of the horrible things that were happening. And so, I just wanted to come on here and share that with you. Land of Love and Drowning by Tiphanie Yanique. This is my second book that I'm reading from her. Earlier this year, I read her newest release, I'm not even sure if it's come out yet. I got an arc from the publishers, Monster in the Middle. And that was very different because Monster in the Middle is set mostly in the United States, even though we are reading about generations of families again in that book. We have a character who is from the Virgin Islands, but we see most of her storyline being depicted when she moves to the US. Stateside is what they call it. So Tiphanie Yanique's writings, I think, are very interesting, and I want to explore more from her. I hope you will read this book and enjoy it, and I'd love to chat with you in the comments down below if you've read it already, or something I said in this video made you want to pick it up or bypass it. Would love to chat with you down there. And thank you so much for watching this video. Give me a thumbs up if you did, subscribe if you want to see more, and let's chat in the comments. Until next time, happy reading. Bye.